Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I suppose this afternoon's debate fits neatly into the traditional BBC summer schedule of repeats. And I do apologise in advance. Unfortunately, I'm suffering from a chronic migraine this afternoon, so while I can see you, I can't actually see anybody else in the chamber. You're all just in a fog there, but I hope you'll take that into account. A couple of weeks ago, I attended an event at a local primary school in my constituency, Eagleston Primary, who had got into partnership with Scottish Opera and had put on a marvellous production. The kids were in fantastic costumes, they were singing. It was altogether more coherent, joyful, original and better rehearsed than any speech I heard from those advocating this motion this afternoon. I understand the importance of the games industry to Scotland. I've never played one, but my sons, when they were younger, used to play something called The Sims. And in The Sims, you were able to construct this completely artificial little world in your own head. You built buildings and put in police stations and wrote constitutions. I never expected. Mr. Robertson knows more about it than I do, obviously. It's inspired him for his contribution today. But I never expected a video game to be the hallmark and centre of Scottish Government policy. And Mr. Robertson, who is indulging in this fantasy, what I suppose must be regarded as the high watermark of his contribution to public office, has otherwise written some really rather nice books. He wrote an excellent book on Vienna, which I commend other people to read. He would be far better applying himself to that task than to the ridiculous nonsense and fantasy that he's brought before this chamber this afternoon. And I don't know how many of the SNP members or Green members sitting behind him this afternoon were here in the 2007 Parliament. A smattering, perhaps. That government led by Alex Salmond, with no record to defend, was actually quite impressive. And of course, in the 2011 election, it won an absolute majority. And it won a right to fight a referendum on Scottish independence. It fought that referendum. It lost that referendum with the highest turnout in any public vote that there has ever been in any contest at any time in the entire history of the United Kingdom. I will in just a second. At any time in the United Kingdom. And in no election since has the separatist movement come close to achieving anything like the poll in favour of independence it achieved then.
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm grateful for Jackson Carlaw taking an intervention. I intervened on his frontbench colleague earlier to ask what the position of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party is in relation to Scotland being able to make a decision about its democratic future. He failed to answer that. Could Jackson Carlaw tell the Chamber what do Scots need to do to be able to secure a vote on their own independent future?
Jackson Carlaw.
Not a speech, Mr. Robertson. In that referendum that you lost in 2014, that the separatists lost in 2014, they said it would be a once-in-a-generation event. And what surprises me genuinely is that in the years since, there has been no attempt whatsoever from the SNP to define what a generation is and when another referendum might reasonably take place.
Let's hear Mr. Carlaw.
Pardon? Sorry, Presiding Officer.
I was calling for quiet so that we might hear you, Mr. Carlaw.
Some people have defined it as 25 years, some have defined it as 40. By the end of this Parliament, we will be 12 years. We will be 12 years from the date of the last referendum. Surely a far better purpose in engaging on the future of Scotland's constitutional future would have been to work with others to say when might another referendum reasonably take place. If it was 2 parliaments before now, 2 parliaments from now, we will have covered that 25 years. But no, instead of... Mr Brown, I think you and I had all this out in a television programme once, and I'm afraid you failed lamentably. And I happen to notice, since you accused others of looking at their phones, you've done nothing but look at your own phone ever since this afternoon, which is deeply ironic. We've also had from Christine Graham talk about the European Union. And it's true. I was one of those who voted to remain. Scotland did vote to remain in the EU referendum in 2016, and that has been trumpeted by the SNP. It hasn't changed the opinion polls in favour of independence. Mr Brown likes to pop to his feet, and sometimes not even from his feet, talk about Liz Truss and the dreadful economic catastrophe, as he sees it, brought about by the government last year. It was certainly an inglorious period in the history of Conservative government. That hasn't changed the opinion polls in favour of Scottish independence. Nothing has changed the opinion polls in favour of Scottish independence. So when Nicola Sturgeon said on television repeatedly after that referendum that she would not call for another one until there was a sustained, substantial and consistent majority in opinion polls in favour of independence, it's never happened. And instead, we have this wheeze, a little backroom exercise, and how can we keep the conversation on independence alive? What can we pretend to say differently? When instead, as others have said, the real issue is no constituent of mine in Eastwood has ever knocked on my door and said, Mr Carlaw, what I want is a new constitution to be thought up for an imaginary post-independent Scotland. What they have said to me is, why is it 4 years before I can get my gallbladder operation when 20 years ago when I had mine it was 4 months? Why is it that they can't get a ferry to and from the Isle of Arran? Why is it the schools are unable to actually provide qualifications and an education of a standard that we saw before this government came to office? Why is it the firefighters are queuing up complaining about this SNP government? Those are the issues. And Sharon Dow was quite right. In the debates that we have on those issues in this Parliament, the SNP benches are largely empty. But where are they today? Absolutely, yes. We'll turn out to discuss the real issues affecting
Let's hear
Scotland
Mr Carlaw.
when the SNP turn out to discuss nothing but fantasy instead. And then, at the climax of it all, we heard from that would-be international revisionist historian Ross Greer with his usual backdoor attack on the monarchy. Let me just say to him and to the SNP serried ranks beside him, the majority of people in this country, I am confident, look forward to the reign of King Charles III, King William IV, and long after we are all dead and gone, the reign of King George VII. Let me conclude, Presiding Officer, with two simple statements which sum up the mood of the unionist majority in this country. Advance Britannia, God save the King.